Hello, good morning, everyone.
Hello. It's good to see people are coming in. We've got a couple of people in. Be really good when you join us. It would be really good if you just want to put into the chat, just tell us where you're from. Be good to know where people are from. You can write that in the chat. Really good to see you all here. This is our first webinar on culture that Karina and I do. We've never done a webinar together before, have we, Karina?
We haven't. We have practiced a bit now, so let's see if it has
Yeah.
worked.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, everybody's going to get to see our live first performance. So I hope it's good and I hope it goes well. Brilliant. So we've got Oliver from Barcelona. Really good. I'm in Barcelona as well. Um, let's see if we can see where other people are
I
from.
used to live in Barcelona. I'm based in Berlin now. Yeah, we can
Hmm.
wait a couple of more minutes. Today, we're going to speak on culture. And I guess if you made it to this webinar, you work in a multicultural setting, or you were raised in a multicultural setting, or maybe you haven't and you want to expand your knowledge. So we are also really curious to find out what brought you here.
Hmm. Yeah, that'd be very good. I think I'm going to have to be very careful now, but I think the pronunciation of that is Kai. I don't know, but I'm going to go for that until I get told I'm not right. Is in Stuttgart in
Ah,
Germany. He's also here with us.
great. So I'd say we start. Brandon, are you ready?
Hmm.
Yes.
I'm ready. Yeah.
Okay, let's go. So, we are here for the webinar on culture, why strong teams struggle, and the cost of ignoring culture. And I would like to show you a few scenarios that you might have encountered. Imagine you're from Germany and negotiating with a client from China. The conversation is going really well. You present your offer, discuss the details, align on the next steps, and the client smiles, nods, and says yes to everything. You will leave the meeting super confident. The deal is closed. 2 weeks later, no response, no confirmation, no deal happening. What happened?
Okay, just one moment, Karina. I'm not seeing
Yes.
your slides move. Is anybody else seeing those slides move, or are you just seeing the title page on culture? Not moving for Oliver, not moving
Not
for
moving.
Brendan.
Okay,
No,
let me
no,
reshare this.
unfortunately.
Okay, no problem. I will just share it again. Give me 1 second.
This is the joys of your first webinar. Yeah, technology. Okay,
Now,
I'm
can
seeing.
you see now?
Well, yeah, I can see a slide. Do they move? Let's see if they move. Yeah, they do move. I'm seeing movement. Oliver's nodding his head. We looks like we're in a really good
Okay.
place.
All
Excellent.
right. Perfect. So let's move on to the second scenario. Now imagine you're from Spain and leading a multicultural team in Barcelona. Everything is great. The team is collaborative, open, everybody's sharing ideas, and new team members join from Ukraine. In the meetings, they're rather serious, quiet. They don't smile much. They wait for your direction, and you leave the meeting thinking they're not engaged at all. Something is wrong there. 2 weeks later, 1 month later, all tasks are completed, the results are high quality, and you receive really positive feedback about the project. Why was your perception so off from the reality of things? Or maybe you have encountered another scenario. You're working in a multicultural team and attending the weekly meeting. Everybody speaks English. It's not everyone's native language, but the discussion is active. Also, ideas are shared. You align on the next steps. And in the end, everybody says, it sounds great. Let's do this. You think everybody is on the same page. Are they on the same page? Well, turns out they're not. Different people start working on different priorities, tasks are not completed that were supposed to be completed, and deadlines were missed. What might have happened there? We are Brandon and Karina, and we're going to guide you through this webinar. And I will hand the word over to Brandon. Can you present yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just to say thank you very much for joining us, for taking an hour out of your day. It's really great to have you here with us. So my name is Brendan. I'm based in Barcelona. I'm a cross-cultural consultant. I haven't always been a cross-cultural consultant. This is kind of my third career, maybe. So I'm originally from the UK, from Birmingham in the UK. I grew up in an Irish immigrant family, so culture and the differences of culture were very clear to me right from the very beginning. I trained as a project manager in the UK and worked in some quite high-paced, fast-paced projects in the UK with people from various different teams. We had a lot of people in our teams from different cultures, certainly Eastern European. As the kind of job markets opened up in Europe, we had to learn how to manage and deal with a lot of people from different cultures. I then had an opportunity to work and to live in West Africa. So I kind of uh, took myself over there, ended my career in the UK, spent nearly 10 years living and working in Ghana, in West Africa, delivering development projects, developing, I was the CEO of an NGO in Ghana. And that was challenging because I was managing a team that was primarily Ghanaian. As a European managing a Ghanaian team, there was a lot that I did wrong, that I made a lot of mistakes. Um, but also there was a fabulous learning process there. And that was a really challenging time, but a really fruitful time. I learned a lot in that process. And then from Ghana, I found myself living in Barcelona. I met my partner in Ghana, and we live here in Barcelona. And I've been working in this cross-cultural field really ever from the very beginning, but consciously and full time for the last 6 or 7 years. Um, and yeah, my work takes me to teams. I work with teams with people from different cultures and try and help reduce that cultural friction. So that's kind of just a little bit of where I've come from and where I am at the moment. So yeah, Karina, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about you and who you are.
Thank you, Brandon. It sounds super interesting, your life. I'm sure we could talk a lot about it, and we will in the next webinars also.
Mhm.
And yeah, thank you. My name is Karina. I come from the world of language learning and language teaching, and this is very connected to culture. So I was raised already in a very multicultural setting. My family is Ukraine. I moved to Germany when I was very young, and started my first big travel and exchange when I was 15 years old. And I lived in the US. And that was basically the opener to working cross-culturally. I studied linguistics, Spanish and education, also business, and I worked at Babbel as a language learning expert, creating multimedia materials for learning and teaching languages. And then I moved back to the business world. So I worked at SBS with Business School Barcelona, where I led the marketing team, and that was again a very, very intercultural environment. We had 40 plus nationalities of students at the school, and the stakeholders were placed all over the world. So you can imagine that intercultural topics came up quite frequently there as well. And currently, I live in Berlin. I create experiences for companies to improve company culture, as well as team trainings and public speaking coaching, and all of that in the realm of international settings. So, culture plays a huge role in communication, and communication helps us reach our higher personal and professional goals. So, it's all interrelated, and how it's interrelated, you will hopefully understand very soon.
Mhm. Just to pick up on that, fabulous, Karina, thank you. The way that Karina and I know each other is because I also teach at the I teach cross-cultural communication at business school as well. We have some mutual friends, and we're working in that same sphere of cross-cultural work, communication, and trying to help companies, businesses, startups, teams to be able to work much more effectively across cultures. So then, Karina, do you want to take us on to our next little bit, our plan for today?
So what we're doing today is we will see why is culture actually relevant for business, then how culture shapes us, and finally we'll take these things together to how national culture shows up at work. And in the end, you will receive a simple framework that you can apply to your work to include culture and more awareness about culture in your everyday work life. In the very end, you will have time for Q&A. You can already write them in the chat if you have questions that come up along the way. But don't worry, we will stay with you so you can also unmute yourself at the very end of the session and ask questions. So, why does culture matter for business? We want to be very clear. Although we speak about international, intercultural misunderstandings, we truly believe, and we also know because it's backed up by science, that diverse teams are the better teams and that on different levels. So, diverse teams, when we look at ethnic diversity, are more profitable than those that are monocultural. At the same time, they have a better and stronger decision making. You will see what makes a better decision. We don't necessarily speak about faster decisions because this is something that's related to culture and you'll find out later. But there's better decisions made that help companies move forward and not waste money and time on correcting decisions in the end. Moreover, multicultural teams are stronger when it comes to customer or like employee retention because uh, when we have diverse and inclusive teams, people feel like they belong. And when employees feel like they belong, it significantly increases how long they will stay with the company. Replacing an employee is very expensive to a company. It costs 50 to 200% of their annual salary. 200% when we speak about higher leadership positions. 50% is rather when it's work that can be replaced in a simpler way. So keeping our workforce and making them feel like they belong is a really important factor also for the business outcomes. And finally, there's a higher innovation revenue. Diverse teams are way more creative because you just get this variety of perspectives, point of views. So innovation increases by 45%. However, of course, when we have a big diversity of people, of perspectives, worldviews, opinions, there are also problems that come with it. And the problems are usually misunderstandings. So, workplace conflict costs businesses yearly $359 billion, a huge number, as you see. And it's not only on the money side, it's also time. And time is money. Obviously, we also know this. But if we put the numbers to the time, we can say that employees spend on average up to 4 hours dealing with conflict. Conflict can be positive if managed in a constructive way, but many times employees deal with conflict if they don't know how to and they don't know where it comes from, is in an unconstructive way. So it is a loss of time that we have here. Poor communication contributes to project failure in 56% of the cases. So we see communication, although it is a very maybe still considered a soft skill, is not a soft skill at all. It is a people skill, but there's actually a measurable outcome, and it's very, very important for the bottom line. And now, the most important thing for us here in this webinar also to understand 60% of conflict in multinational teams is cultural origin. Again, to highlight this, the different culture that they exist are not a problem at all. The problem is that we are not aware of how different cultures show up or expect certain work situations, which leads to misunderstanding. And this is what we will want to uncover. We want to uncover this because annually, if we think it's 60%, around $200 billion could be saved if we manage to deal better with cross-cultural understanding. And we know most employees, actually 86%, are aware that a lack of effective communication collaboration is the main cause of workplace failure. So my question for you, how do you see it? Have you ever encountered communication and collaboration conflicts at your workplace? And did you actually feel that it affected how productive you were, how innovative you were?
Mm. Yeah, if I and if I could pick up on something there, Karina, about this kind of we're talking about diverse teams being more productive, being more efficient, um, and that's true. It's been something that's been talked a lot about over the last couple of years, 3 years. We need to have diversity in our workplaces. So not just cultural diversity, but obviously gender, age, the different aspects of life and of society. However, having diverse teams doesn't automatically mean that we're going to be more efficient, more productive. And in actual fact, if we don't have psychological safety, then those teams are actually they're actually struggling to perform. And psychological safety is an interesting aspect because that's felt very differently across cultures. So if I'm as a British person, the things that are going to make me feel psychologically safe are not going to be the same things that may make somebody from a culture, an Asian culture. We all experience psychological safety differently. So having those teams that are really functioning well, there also needs to be an emphasis on, okay, we need to build psychological safety, but then how do we do that with people from different cultures? And so, I think that often there isn't enough emphasis placed on that, accommodating those different cultures. And there's a
Mhm.
lot of statistics in there, a lot of really great statistics that prove that cultural aspects at work really are significant. We're not talking about something small, talking about something quite significant. So yeah, as Karina says, it would be really good to hear if anybody has any experiences of misunderstandings, conflicts at work. No names, but yeah, would be good to hear about those.
Yeah, feel free to comment, or maybe it's now food for thought. And maybe what will help you also with this food for thought is, well, this I will just quickly go over it, but it's a big risk, obviously, if we don't have this cultural intelligence. So, if we have diversity without being aware of our differences and how we can work efficiently together, it can lead to misinterpretations, slower decisions, worse decisions, hidden conflicts, disengagement. And this means for the company, higher costs, lower productivity, and a slower growth. But if you have this cultural intelligence, it changes everything because you can align faster, you can have set clear expectations. Through better feedback, you have fewer conflicts and a way stronger team collaboration, which then leads to higher revenue, productivity, and faster growth. So that's what Brandon said. Knowing about these differences already will set us a step forward.
Mm,
And yeah, I will give you some more food for thought because now we were there a lot in the theory, but I think we should also consider and reflect a lot how culture shapes us and what it actually is. Because culture is very difficult to grasp, right? There's one scholar, his name is Gerrit Hofstede, and he's very famous in this field. He says that culture is the collective mental programming of a group. So we're speaking about group values, group behaviors that align over a multitude of people. And when we speak about culture, there's so many different cultures that we can consider. And actually, our first cultural experiences start when we are babies and we are born into this first cultural group that we have, which is usually our family. And this is where we start receiving this mental programming of how we see the world, what we value in the world, what we expected as normal behavior or not normal behavior in a certain context. And then we grow, we get our peers, our school system. When we start work life, our companies, they have their own culture. And within that, we have subgroups, teams that have their own culture. So when we speak about just culture, it is such a broad topic. Here, we want to focus on national culture because national culture is something that dribbles down on all of these aspects. Our families who are also mentally programmed by these national cultures, also our workplaces. And that's what we want to focus on. Now, culture has many aspects to them. And a concept you might have heard already about is the cultural iceberg. And there's things about culture that are visible, but underneath lie a lot of topics that are not visible. What is visible about culture? I don't need to lecture you on about that. I'm sure you have experienced it, but it's everything you can see, taste, smell, perceive. So it's the language, food, dress, behavior, etc. But
Mm.
underneath come the actual interesting parts that we need to uncover about ourselves, but also about other people if we want to collaborate efficiently with them. And those are values, beliefs, the norms, expectations, etc. So, Brandon, maybe as an example, you said you worked in Ghana for many years, and I guess there were
Hmm.
many cultural differences you saw when you arrived
Yeah,
that were
yeah.
very obvious. So, for example,
Yeah.
how was the food? Food is a great example of that. So, how was your breakfast in Ghana, maybe?
Right. Right. So, yeah, well, breakfast in Barcelona comprises of maybe some muesli, yogurt, and a coffee. Breakfast in Ghana comprises well, of a dish called wache. I ate this every morning for years. Wache is rice with beans, ground cassava, and then on the top of that, you have a sauce called shito. And shito is ground dry fish ground up into a powder, mixed with onions, mixed with tomatoes, and some of the hottest chilies on the planet. And then you pour that sauce over your wache, and that's your breakfast. And that's how a lot of people in Ghana will start their day. Completely different here. And the thing is why is that different? Why is it like that? And this is the thing about culture because culture has a root. You know the reasons why we do things and this iceberg is like the behavior is informed by the things underneath the surface. And usually longevity and the way we've always done things is kind of part of that. But people eat a breakfast like that because they're going to go off into their field and they're going to do some hard physical work. And they need high protein food, they need energy to do that. And so a very cultural breakfast. Really interesting. The other thing that showed up at work a lot in Ghanaian culture is the inability of Ghanaians to say no. And when I say Ghanaians, I mean the inability or this tendency, because we're talking about tendencies, of people in my team not being able to say no to me. So even when something was terribly wrong or they couldn't do something, they would never say the word no. It was impossible. Um, and this is kind of the visible behavior above the line, but below the line, um, what's informing that? Why is that? Why is that happening? And that's because uh, Ghanaian culture is very typically hierarchical. There's a lot of respect for elderly people, a lot of respect for people with titles, with positions, and you don't want to upset people. You don't want to offend people. You don't want to make people feel bad. So it's almost impossible to say the word no. And I didn't know that at the beginning. So when people were not telling me no, I thought everything was all good. And obviously later I found out that that was not the case.
Mhm. Very interesting. I'm sure there's so many experiences that go towards this direction. I see a hand. You can write your questions in the chat, and in the end, we will have a Q&A.
Hmm.
Thank you, Brandon, for sharing your experience. And you actually said something very important that's also important for us, and I think also for you to understand. So, as I said, we generalize, we simplify things because we speak about the mental programming of a group. And this generalization helps us understand a pattern and understand tendencies. So we talk about norms, expectations. So what do we consider as normal? What do we expect in a certain situation? Shared ways of communicating, of working. So it's a very generalized view we have here. Having said this, we are not speaking about individuals and we cannot judge individuals based on that. And these are not fixed labels. So, for example, Brandon gave the example of in Ghana, there's a tendency that people usually don't say no to elderly people because of high respect. Individuals might act very differently in this situation, right? So it's not that all people in Ghana do this, but it's rather an expected behavior to show more respect towards somebody who is older than you, maybe compared to other cultures where it's more egalitarian and um, we use also the same pronouns. I don't know what's your native languages, but many languages have even words to distinguish these hierarchies, like in German, du and sie, or tú, usted in Spanish. So, yeah, we can go in depth, which we will do in this whole webinar series. But just keep in mind, we don't want to create stereotypes. We want to understand general tendencies that we can expect from a group behavior. And with that, I would like to hand over to Brandon because now
Yeah.
we want to see in which areas of work does national culture show up and how.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Really, really good. And really good to just touch on that point of stereotypes. And we're not talking about stereotypes here. So I'm guessing that you can probably all see my the slides. Yeah, I've got a
Yeah.
thumbs up for Karina, so that's put me in a good place. So how does culture show up at work? So just to kind of give an overview, really, is that we all take our cultures into work. We take them into our private lives, into every interaction that we have. We are taking our culture into that moment, and often we're not always aware of how our culture is showing up at work. So, for example, if we take that iceberg model, when I work with teams and we go through the iceberg, people are often able to say, "Yeah, this is why." This is the behavior. This person felt rude, or this person didn't quite do what they were supposed to do, or the feedback I received was really harsh. These are visible behaviors that we can see, but they're being informed by these below the surface level values, beliefs, our culture. And often it's really difficult for us to even explain why we are acting in a certain way. And which means that it's also very difficult to understand why other people are behaving in a certain way because we're not always conscious of those values and those things that are going on below the surface. So, part of this series that we're going to be doing is looking at how culture shows up at work, and also looking at the Erin Myers framework that she has built. I'm assuming you can all now see my key frameworks little graph chart there. Perfect. So at the end, you can see we have Erin Meyer. So before I get to Erin Meyer, let me just throw us back to 1959. Um, Edward T. Hall, one of the kind of founding fathers of kind of cultural understanding culture in terms of low and high context communication. We're going to come and talk about those in a little bit briefly today, but more next time as well. And on that work that he had built, we've got various other key people that have been researching in this field. It's a very big field of work. We've got Gert Ofsted, as Karina mentioned, who really developed these six cultural dimensions. And his work was in IBM. He did a massive study in IBM of people from different offices all over the world. And then on top of that, we have the Trompernaz studies. We also have Richard Lewis, who has also worked on that and has brought another dimension to how we look at cultures. He has a triangle with cultures kind of placed around a triangle. Then we have the Globe Project, which really focused on business, on how culture shows up in business, and tried to develop the work of Hofstede. So we've had all of these kind of key players in this field, and now we're up to Erin Meyer. And what Erin Meyer has done quite well is that she's taken a lot of this work over the years, and she's been able to distill that down into a framework that is a lot more accessible than past frameworks. It's easier to understand, it's easier to see how it's working, and it's kind of where we're at today. I mean, don't get me wrong. Hofstede there is still relevant today. The work from the Globe, all of these people are still relevant today. They're kind of foundational works. But Erin Meyer has been able to produce something that we've been able to engage with. I use it a lot in my teaching. I also use it a lot in my training because it's just accessible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us through Erin Meyer's framework. She's got eight scales, basically eight scales. Oi, 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 come back. Eight scales. And I'm going to talk about these scales briefly just to give an overview of what they are and kind of how they work. And obviously these are going to be the topics that we're going to discuss in future webinars. So our next webinar, we will be looking at the communicating scale in a lot more detail. But let me just give an overview of these scales. So communicating, this is all about our low context and high context communication, explicit and implicit. We then have a second scale of evaluating. How do we give feedback? Well, how do we give negative feedback? Do we do that directly? Maybe many of you have heard of the kind of sandwich method of giving feedback. You know, start with something positive, give them the bad news, and then end with something positive. We're all taught this, but you hear this a lot. But this is a super Western perspective on giving feedback, and it does not work in all cultures. So that's the evaluating scale and how we do that. Persuading is how we present ideas and how we get people on board with those ideas. Are they theory? Do you put the theory first or do you put the practice first? Again, I'm going to open these up a little bit um, uh, um, in our next slides on each one. And also leading. Um, is that an egalitarian, flat structure leader, or is it much more hierarchical, where authority is quite clearly defined, decisions flow in one direction, kind of top down? Deciding scale, how do we make decisions together in our teams? Are we making them together, or is that again going to come from somebody? Is that always going to be deferred to the boss? Is that the person who makes the decision, or do we make it together as a group? And trusting, one of my living in Spain, coming from a British culture living in Spain, trusting scale is very interesting for me because it's how we build relationships, and that's very different across cultures. So is that kind of task-based, I'm going to show you my work and you're going to say, wow, you're really good, or is it about relationship based? And yeah, lots of cultures have different ways of doing that. And then we have disagreeing. How do we disagree? How do we do that well in our teams? And then finally, scheduling time. Another great one. Having lived in West Africa, coming from a British culture, time in West Africa was was alien to me for a very long time until I understood what was actually happening. So these 8 scales that Myers has brought to us. I'm going to go through each one in just a little bit more detail. Today in this webinar, we're giving that kind of overview, kind of this introduction to the topic, so that you know where we're going over this whole series, where we will be discussing these 8 scales and bringing in other people's research and other things that we know work well in teams, and help teams to work and perform better together. Okay, so here we go. Communicating. Let's have a little look at this. The way that we speak is very much informed by our mother tongue and the culture that we grew up in. And we learn so much about what's the best way to get things done. So you have at 2 extremes on this scale. You have low context and high context. So low context communication is very much explicit. It's I say what I mean what I say. You don't really need to listen to anything else around it. Don't need to worry about the context. You don't need to worry about my body language so much. You just need to listen to the words that I am saying, because all the truth is in those words. Um, and so everything messages are taking at that face value. It's spelt out very clearly. It's very clear. It's very precise. As a project manager, working in the UK, all of our communication had to be super low context, high pressures, fast deadlines. You can't spend time clarifying, working out. It just needs to be said once and that's it. Everybody knows. And that works when you're in a low context culture that has a tendency to be low context. Um, and also in low context, silence is uncomfortable. Um, British people, we don't like silence, or they have a tendency not to like silence. You want to fill those silences with words. It feels a little uncomfortable. However, in higher context cultures, silence actually isn't so bad. It can mean a lot of, it can mean a lot of different things. It can mean that I'm thinking, I'm considering, I'm allowing space for other people to think. So we have these 2 ends of this scale and a higher context. So, for example, I'm British, and you can see some examples of those lower context cultures that tend to be lower context. Germany, the USA, the Netherlands, Australia, Scandinavia. British culture tends to be a little bit further along the scale, and I'm going to just show you a little bit of that. Um, but then this high context. So Spain tends to be a higher context culture where you need it's much more sophisticated communication, in that you need to be aware of context, of the relationship, of the things that are, we call it reading between the lines, is you need to have this skill to read between the lines. So if you've grown up in a low context culture, I can tell you from experience, my experience, that I'm not very good at reading between the lines. So when I come into contact with higher context cultures, Spain is a higher context culture, and Japan is considered to be one of the highest context cultures. That my communication needs to change. My listening has to change. I need to be aware that there's so much more that is not being said with words, but is still being communicated to me. So this is our communication scale. Now, what happens is that these countries all exist on different places on this scale. So, at kind of the higher context, then we have countries like Japan and India and Saudi Arabia. So, a lot of the kind of subcontinent cultures, sub-Saharan Africa, Asian cultures tend to live in this higher context end of the scale. And those lower contexts tends to be the North American cultures, German, Netherlands, and Scandinavia. And I think the interesting thing is that just to flip back to Karina and what she said about stereotypes is that we all exist at different places on these scales. We're going to talk about this a lot more in our next webinar. But British people kind of exist a little bit to the left of the center. So, and we're kind of considered a bit low context. But for people from an American culture, I actually may sound a bit high context, even though I'm on that lower side of the scale, because there's a distance between us. And we'll talk about those a lot more over the next few webinars.
Just,
Our value. Yes, tell me.
sorry to interrupt. Just if you go back to the high context and low context, and if you think back about the examples we had at the beginning, remember we
Mm,
had this example of the German communicating with a client in China, and the client was saying, yes, yes, it's great, but there was no deal in the end. That could have
mhm,
been a great example for the communicating scale because in some cultures, saying yes or nodding does not mean yes, I agree, but just means yes, I acknowledge what you're saying, but I'm not giving you enough details to confirm that this is a deal, right? And you should understand
mhm,
this. So that
mhm.
could have been a prime example of the communicating scale.
Absolutely. Yes does not always mean yes. It might mean maybe, and in some circumstances, it may even mean no. It depends on the context and what's happening. But yeah, absolutely right, that Karina. Okay, and then so our evaluating. So how do we give feedback? This scale looks at are we very direct with our feedback? So some cultures can be quite have a tendency to be quite direct. This isn't good. You need to change that, and that's totally okay. Other cultures tend to be much more indirect. So criticism being wrapped up in positive language. Think of the sandwich method. And some cultures even you don't even with the feedback you don't get the bit in the middle of the sandwich. You just get the outside, and you are left to wonder or assume and if you are a higher context culture and you come from an indirect negative feedback culture, you will know what the problem is. It won't be said explicitly, but you'll know it. So sometimes you don't even get that bit in the middle of the sandwich. And obviously, when those two come together, if I'm giving direct negative feedback to somebody that comes from an indirect negative feedback culture, so think about those again, those higher context cultures like Japan and China and Indonesia, but also think about British people who are a lot less higher context, Canada and Thailand, then they're going to feel that feedback not as constructive. They're going to feel that as an attack. There's a potential that it's going to feel like an attack, a criticism. You don't trust me. You don't like me. Maybe you don't even want me working here. And that's a shame because that's not what's happening. It's trying to move forward. So that's how these things can come together in this evaluating scale. We're obviously going to be talking about that also in a bit more detail. And then our persuading. This is really interesting for if you're doing pitching, pitching for bids and things like that. Who are you pitching to? Because if you're coming from a principles first culture, you are going to want to hear the theory behind your pitch. I want to know how this pitch was put together. What's the theory? What's the background on this? I don't want to know up front what this does. I don't want to know the facts, the case. I want to know the theory behind it. So if you're pitching to somebody who is, if you're from a principles first culture, and you're pitching to somebody from an applications first culture who wants to hear, I want to know what the return on investment is. I want to know what it does, how it does it, and how it's going to change my business. but you're starting with all the theory, all the background. You can lose the moment because these people from application first cultures are expecting to hear the facts. I want to know it now. Tell me, how's it going to change my life? Not the theory, and vice versa. If you're in applications first and you're pitching to a principal first culture, if you start going with the facts, the case studies, the how it's going to change your life, people are going to be sitting in the audience thinking, yeah, but I want to know how you built this. I want to know why you built this. That's what I want to know first. So yeah, so there's our persuading scale. And then leading. Flat structure, clear authority. Flat structures, you hear it a lot, flat structures, this kind of northern Scandinavian kind of structures, really good. Everybody's equal. We all get in together. The boss doesn't have his own parking spot. He cycles to work and we're all in it together. That's great when everybody in the team works that way. But if you've got people from other cultures that are expecting to have a much more hierarchical structure, then those people are going to really struggle to fit into that flat structure. Um, so yeah, and in those egalitarian structures, the boss is accessible. Staff can challenge ideas. We can say to the boss, I don't think that's right. Maybe we should be looking at something different. But if you're from a hierarchical structure, you're never going to feel comfortable challenging your boss in a group situation. It's just not possible for you to do that. And again, you can see some examples of cultures that have a tendency to work in these ways. So that's our leading scale. And then I just want, yeah,
One
Karina,
second,
tell me,
Brendan, because I think this could be also a great
tell me.
example, great answer to the problem we had before. Remember when we had the team lead in Spain and
Mm,
Ukrainian team members came in that were quiet and did not challenge the team leader's
mm,
idea, but in
mhm,
the end they were happy. And it's possibly because they were expecting their team lead to have the authority to take the decision and they moved with the flow they were given and delivered the results without challenging, maybe challenging the process, but without directly challenging the team lead in their decisions.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
the scale could be a great explanation for that.
Absolutely right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, really, really good. Okay, so then deciding how we make this is the fifth scale, deciding how do we make decisions? Do we do that in a group? Are we all responsible for those decisions? If it goes wrong, do we all put our hands up and say, yeah, we didn't get that right? Or is this a top down where everybody's defaulting to the boss? Yeah, we can talk about it, but ultimately that's not our decision. We don't have the responsibility for that. That belongs with somebody else. That belongs with the next person up in the chain. Again, you can see when these two things come together, when people from these different tendencies come together, you can see that ownership of decisions can be ambiguous. Expectations that if we have a group discussion and we agree something in a group, that's just going to get done and dealt with, and that's it. We all leave that meeting and we get on with it. But there's a lot of people who may be in that meeting that are thinking, okay, that was a nice discussion, but I'll wait for the email from the boss to let us know what he's going to do. Things don't happen when they should happen. They don't happen the way that they should happen. Deadlines get missed. Yeah. And again, you can see some examples of cultures that have this tendency. Um,
And
yeah, tell me,
again,
Karina.
now we come to our third case because you
Yeah.
see, deciding in leadership, actually, all of these scales, now we look at them separately, but they are all interrelated. And if you remember our third example, where the multicultural team, everybody agreed that the idea sounds good, but in the end, the ownership was not clear, the decision making, the process were not clear. So it was too much of different ideas of and expectations. And this is the
Mm.
deciding scale that can give us insights on how different cultures expect the process and outcome to work.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. And you see this, I see this all the time in meetings. I see this all the time with my clients. There's just different expectations. People are coming with different expectations that below the surface cultural behaviors and values that they're taking into work, and means that they just expect things to happen in a different way. And when they don't happen, there's confusion, there's frustration, there's anxiety, and ultimately what happens is that if those things are not addressed, people start disengaging. And you may even have that, we call this quiet quitting. People just start looking for other jobs. It's like I don't fit in here, I don't belong here. Um, yeah, there are quite significant consequences of not getting of not having those things in place that help teams to work really well together. Trusting, I love trust. In my culture, in my British culture, there was a tendency for trust to be built on show me what you can do, show me what you've done, demonstrate that you can do what you know what you're talking about, and that will give me trust. So that's how I know I can work with you. And of course, we have conversations and we like each other. Excellent. However, in other cultures, so especially, and I think of Spain as well, where I live, but also moving towards those Brazil, another huge culture that has a tendency to work on relationship based. You need to invest in the relationship with the individual first. The business doesn't come. It's all about the relationship and building what we call effective trust. So it's slow building. It doesn't happen fast. It means socializing. It means meals. It means time together. It means that business may get done in a social setting, that you may be agreeing on a deal or something, but you're out having a couple of drinks or or a dinner with some people. This is relationship-based trust and how this is built. I've seen people. There's a classic video you'll see on the internet of a North American culture coming together with a Japanese culture, and I noticed there's a comment in from Oliver. We'll talk about that at the end. But the American was culture, the North American was just wanted to get the deal done, get the deal done, get the deal done, and the person from the Japanese culture was very much, well, why don't we go out and have something to eat? Why don't we get to know each other first? And it's difficult to watch. It's just this constant clash and nobody's changing. And this is cultural intelligence. We'll talk about cultural intelligence at another time. And then our disagreeing. How do we disagree? So can we challenge our boss? Can we openly disagree with our boss? Can we have an argument about that in a group setting? Is that possible? Or are we from a culture that has a tendency to avoid confrontation? You can imagine confrontation at work. Nobody really likes confrontation. But there is healthy confrontation where we challenge, we push. And in some cultures, that's great and that's healthy. And that creates, it's a genesis and a catalyst for really great ideas. But that confrontation avoidance doesn't mean that we're not going to create great ideas, but it means that we don't openly disagree. We don't do that. So if you're confrontational and you're working with somebody from a culture that has a tendency to not, we can destroy people's confidence. We can really push people out. Very problematic. And scheduling, our final one, time. So time is, I have a tendency to show up to meetings at least 5 minutes early. Uh, I leave the house with an hour to spare. Whereas other cultures are not like that. Schedule a meeting for 2 o'clock, and that meeting may not start until 2:40, and that's okay. But if you don't know that, and the frustration builds up very quickly. This flexible and linear time, yeah, and I know it can build up very quickly. Um, so understanding that some people work in also monochronic and polychronic, some people just work on this kind of linear time, one task, one task, one task, my schedule, my schedule, my schedule. But other cultures work on a very polychronic perspective where they're dealing with three or four things at once, and they tend to deal with the thing that comes to them or the thing that shouts the loudest. That tends to be the thing that gets dealt with next. So time is much more uh, flexible. So those are our scales. Karina, do you have anything to add before I talk about this? We've only got 5 minutes left, so um,
I think you can introduce the framework because it's going to be very interesting and the audience can also
Yeah.
download it and then we can get to
Yeah.
Q&A, yeah?
Absolutely. So look, just this is a framework that I've been using with my clients. This is kind of an umbrella. Down from here, there's a lot of things that trickle down, but I just wanted to give you an overview of how we can start surfacing some of these things in our teams and in our businesses. We already know that 60% of conflicts in teams have a root in culture. So that's individual cultures coming into work, creating friction, creating cultural friction. So one of the things that I've developed and I use with my clients is this ABSIS framework, which is a framework that you can, depending on where your team is, you can join at stage two, three, depending on where people are. But that first point is this acknowledge. We need to acknowledge that culture is a factor in our teams and that is showing up in work and that shows up in many different ways. Think of the different scales: decision making, feedback, communicating. Only once those conversations are happening, that we acknowledge that culture's there, can we start to build safety. This is what I was talking about: psychological safety, that teams have to have psychological safety, but it's culturally specific. So we have to build that, bearing in mind the cultures that exist in our teams. And then slow down to speed up, that counterintuitive thing. This is just slowing down, investing time to make sure that we have some proper agreements of how we're going to work together. And then after that is to integrate those perspectives, is to really have processes that allow people to really put their perspectives in, not just those loud voices, not just the ones that always speak. And that means doing different things, like maybe having a document that people can contribute before and after a meeting instead of having to be on the spot in the meeting. And then that final stage is this sustaining this practice. This is having this framework constantly being revisited and reevaluated and going back to a stage if we feel that that's not working. We're going to send a copy of this framework out to everybody who attended the webinar today. And I'm going to give it with a lot more detail, so you'll be able to see how to use that and maybe implement it. If you're watching this after the webinar and you're not watching it live, if you just want to put framework in the comments, then we'll make sure that that finds its way to you as well. And just to let you know that our next webinar will be on the 28th of May, where we're going to look at in a lot more detail about the communicating scale, this low context, high context, and how that shows up at work and how we can work well with it. Okay, so this is me and Karina. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. These QRs will take you to our LinkedIn pages. I do a weekly newsletter that I will send out. I send out each week talking about cultural friction in teams. Karina, how people connect with you?
Yeah, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm currently building my business. It's called Speak To It. It's an agency for business professionals in intercultural work environments. And currently, I have different services. One is public speaking coaching, especially for pitching in international environments. The other is team training and team building activities. And last but not least, to improve the company culture, networking and public speaking events that I bring to companies or where I come as an MC. So I'm quite open also to ideas because now it's my testing phase of what you actually need. So feel free to reach out to me and we can develop something together to make you reach your business goals through communication.
Fabulous, absolutely fabulous. Okay, so we did have a couple of questions in there. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen just so I can have a look because I know that Oliver mentioned something really interesting in the comments, and he says, "Yeah, we were dealing with a Japanese company and realized that nobody wanted to take personal responsibility, so it was all a group decision." Yes, absolutely. Japanese culture has a tendency to be quite on the other extreme of the scale in terms of communication, hierarchy. So often you'll find that people will come into that meeting and they will always have to defer back to somebody else. they probably don't have the responsibility to take the decision or make the decision in that meeting, and they have to defer to somebody else. And it's always going to be consensual. So they're going to have to go away, talk about it, and then come back, is very typical. But super high context culture, that tendency. So communicating there is very much about reading the air. Okay.
Do you have any more questions? We can also stay a bit longer for you if you have another topic you would like to open. Yeah, Chancel?
Hello, good morning, Karina, and good morning, Brendan. It was an excellent
Mm.
webinar that you have both hosted. There's something that I actually wanted to add on. Brendan mentioned the whole hierarchy when he was in Ghana, people, not wanting to say no. Another thing that I realized with people working in Africa and sometimes in some Asian countries is that nobody likes to leave just before the bus. So sometimes that means you could wait. I don't know. Like, let's say you're meant to finish at 6 p.m., you'll stay until 9 p.m., because you are scared to leave before your bus leaves. So I've realized there's also that as well with the whole hierarchy. I just
Yeah,
add that.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that my experience of working in Ghana, Burkina Faso, Togo, is that there is a lot of respect for titles. So if you have a title, you automatically have respect. Now, sometimes it doesn't matter if you are amazing at your job. That's not the point. Often it's that you have respect because you have found your way to having that title. So if you're the boss, which is obviously a title, people are always got eyes on the boss. What's the boss doing? I don't want to upset the boss. I don't want to make the boss look like I'm trying to be his equal or I'm always going to defer. And again, these are tendencies.
Mm.
Um, but yes, I have a lot of I have some really amazing stories of dealing with people that perceive themselves to be higher than me in terms of their title and how I've been treated. And yeah, it's very surprising for me when I first started working in these cultures. I think anybody that's working in a sub-Saharan African culture, and my experience is very much specifically West Africa, English speaking West Africa, is that you cannot go there with as I have, with a British perspective or a kind of a, a kind of a Western world perspective and assume that you're going to be able to do business the same way because you're not. It won't work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chancel, for adding.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
If
Well,
you have more questions, you can reach out to us anytime via LinkedIn.
mhm,
Reddit will have this amazing newsletter. I will hopefully start my podcast soon. It's in the making.
excellent.
So stay tuned for everything that's coming up. And see you at the next
Excellent.
webinar for the
Indeed.
communicating skill.
28th. Fabulous. Take care, everybody, and we shall see you next time. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.